Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling confused, guilty, or ashamed, even though you didn't do anything wrong? Have you ever found yourself apologizing just to keep the peace, or saying yes to something your heart was clearly saying no to? If you have, you're not alone, and you may have experienced manipulation without even realizing it. Manipulation isn't always loud. It's not always aggressive. Sometimes it comes in the form of concern, sometimes through silence, sometimes through flattery, and sometimes through people we love, trust, admire, or fear losing. Manipulation is the intentional and strategic influence of someone's thoughts, emotions, or decisions, not for truth, not for love, but for control. It works by making you doubt yourself, question your reality, and slowly hand over your power without force, without even knowing it's happening. Many people think manipulation is a modern concept discovered by psychology. But the truth is, manipulation is ancient. It is as old as humanity itself. The first documented example isn't found in a psychology textbook. It's found in the book of Genesis. In the Garden of Eden, something profound happened. The serpent didn't show up with violence, weapons, or force. He didn't threaten Eve. He didn't scream. He manipulated, and the tactics he used thousands of years ago are the same tactics manipulators still use today. He began with planting doubt. Did God really say? Not an accusation, a question. One designed to shake her confidence in what she knew was true. Then he distorted truth. You will not surely die. Half truth, half lie, wrapped in a tone of certainty. Then he appealed to desire, ego, and unmet longing. You will be like God. He targeted the human desire for more, for elevation, for worth, for significance. This is manipulation at its core. Create doubt in your mind. Confuse your truth. Trigger insecurity or desire, and influence your decision. Psychology today calls these tactics gaslighting, cognitive distortion, identity erosion, and emotional persuasion. The serpent did not take Eve's freedom. He made her give it away. That is what manipulation does. It doesn't need to steal your power. It convinces you to surrender it. And from that moment forward, manipulation became part of the human story. But why did it work? Because manipulation doesn't target the logical mind first. It targets the emotional mind. It targets the nervous system. It targets the inner child, the unhealed wounds, the part of us that doubts ourselves. Long before modern psychology, this moment showed the world that manipulation exploits three human vulnerabilities: our need for validation and belonging, our fear of being wrong, rejected, or unloved, and our desire to feel valued, special, or enough. Every manipulator, whether in families, relationships, friendships, workplaces, or even spiritual places, still uses these three entry points. And just like Eve, most victims don't realize they're being manipulated. Because manipulation doesn't come dressed as a threat. It comes dressed as help, love, guidance, concern, or I know better than you. Eve wasn't weak. She wasn't naive. She was human. We all have moments where our insecurities, needs, or emotions leave us open to influence. That is why manipulation is so dangerous. Because it doesn't break down the strongest version of you. It targets you at the moment you're unsure, emotional, or needing support. Think of real life. A partner who says, "If you really loved me, you would do this for me." A parent who tells a child, "After everything I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me." a friend who only shows kindness when they need something from you, and guilt when you set boundaries. Manipulation twists love into obligation. It replaces freedom with pressure, and it makes you feel responsible for someone else's emotions. The serpent used no force. Abusive partners often use no force. Toxic friends don't need force. Narcissistic parents don't need force. All they need is access to your mind, your emotions, and your self-doubt. This is why the first act of manipulation in Eden wasn't just a spiritual event. It was a psychological blueprint, a blueprint that still repeats in human relationships today. Manipulation begins where clarity ends, where self-trust is shaken, where truth becomes blurry. The goal is always the same. Replace your inner voice with theirs. And once that happens, a person no longer needs to control you, because you will start controlling yourself the way they want you to. This is why manipulation is one of the most powerful forms of control, because it works from the inside out. As we move deeper into this teaching, we're going to break down how manipulation affects the brain, why certain personalities are more vulnerable to it, and the psychological tactics manipulators use to gain control. But before we go there, remember this: manipulation didn't start with humans. It started with the corruption of truth, with the breaking of self-trust, with the separation between a person and their inner knowing. And the journey of healing from manipulation is the journey of returning to truth, rebuilding self-trust, and learning to recognize the difference between influence and control. Now let's move to Section 2, the psychology of manipulation and why people become vulnerable to it. To understand manipulation deeply, we must look at not only how manipulators operate, but also why certain people become easy targets. Because manipulation is not just about the manipulator's tactics. It's about the internal openings within us that allow those tactics to work. Manipulation is a psychological game, one that targets the mind, the emotions, and the nervous system long before it targets behavior. It operates through subtle conditioning, not sudden control. No one becomes manipulated overnight. Manipulation happens in stages, through confusion, emotional hooks, repeated patterns, and psychological conditioning. Let's begin with the psychological core of manipulation. At its root, manipulation works by disrupting a person's ability to trust their own perception. When someone gets you to doubt what you feel, what you see, what you know, or even who you are, they gain access to your internal world. And once a person has access to your inner world, they don't need to force you anymore, because now they can influence you from within. Modern psychology has a term for this: cognitive dissonance. The mental discomfort we feel when our mind holds two conflicting truths at the same time. Manipulators intentionally create this conflict so that you become mentally and emotionally unstable, looking to them for clarity. For example, someone may say, "I care about you. I'm only telling you this because I love you." Yet the words that follow tear you down, doubt your worth, and leave you feeling small. Your heart hears love. Your body feels pain, and your mind becomes confused. And when the mind is confused, it seeks safety, usually from the very person who caused the confusion. This is one of the most powerful psychological traps of manipulation. The manipulator positions themselves as both the source of pain and the source of comfort. This creates what psychologists call a trauma bond. an emotional attachment formed through a cycle of hurt and reward, pain and relief, fear and affection. It is the same cycle that keeps people in toxic relationships, friendships, or even family dynamics for years. Spiritual texts warned us about this dynamic long before psychology named it. In the story of Samson and Delilah, Delilah didn't overpower Samson physically. She overpowered him emotionally. She used his affection and vulnerability to break down his defenses. She became the source of closeness and the source of destruction. This is one of the earliest biblical depictions of a trauma bond. Manipulators know that emotion is more powerful than logic. So they don't attack logic first. They attack emotion. They target the nervous system. The brain has two primary modes, survival mode and rational mode. In survival mode, the brain is not thinking. It is reacting. It is trying to avoid pain or loss. Manipulation works best when a person is in survival mode, when they fear conflict, abandonment, disapproval, or rejection. This is why manipulators often trigger fear, insecurity, guilt, or shame. Because when you are emotionally overwhelmed, your ability to think clearly shuts down. Psychologically, the nervous system responds with one of four reactions: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Most people know the first three. But the fourth, fawning, is the one most exploited by manipulators. Fawning is the instinct to please, to comply, to stay small, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace at your own expense. It is a survival response learned by people who grew up in environments where love, approval, or safety were conditional. Many adults who fall into manipulative relationships are not weak. They are wounded. They learned from childhood that to survive emotionally, they must silence their needs, give in, adapt, or earn love through pleasing others. Let's pause here, not to reflect, but to highlight a truth many people don't realize. Manipulators don't choose everyone. They choose the kind-hearted, the empathetic, the loyal, the forgiving, the ones with soft hearts and high tolerance for pain. They choose people with depth because depth gives them emotional access. Manipulators rarely prey on the cold, detached, or self-assured. They target those who feel deeply, love deeply, and hope deeply, because those are the people who can be emotionally influenced. So why do certain people become vulnerable to manipulation? There are several psychological reasons, and most of them begin early in life. Unmet emotional needs in childhood. If a child grew up needing love, validation, or approval they didn't receive, they grow into adults who become hungry for the very affection manipulators imitate. Attachment wounds. If love was inconsistent, unpredictable, or conditional, the nervous system becomes programmed to chase love, even when it hurts. Lack of boundaries. If a child was not allowed to say no, they grow into an adult who feels guilty or afraid when setting boundaries. Identity suppression. If a child was shamed, silenced, or told their feelings were too much, they learn to doubt their inner voice, making them dependent on others for guidance, and manipulators can sense this, almost intuitively. Just like a wolf can detect the injured sheep, manipulators can detect who has the emotional openings. They test with small comments, small criticisms, small disrespect. If the person tolerates, it apologizes for it or excuses it, the manipulator knows they have access. This is why the first red flag of manipulation is not the manipulator's behavior. It is our discomfort that we ignore. Eve's first mistake wasn't speaking to the serpent. It was entertaining a voice that contradicted what she knew to be true. She doubted herself for a moment, and that was enough. Manipulation gains power not because the manipulator is strong, but because the victim is disconnected from their inner truth. And that disconnection usually starts long before the manipulator, appears often in childhood through abandonment wounds, lack of emotional safety, or feeling unseen. Manipulators step into those unhealed spaces and offer what looks like love, certainty, protection, or guidance. But it is only bait. Whether in romantic relationships, I'm the only one who will ever love you the way I do. In family, after everything I did for you, you owe me. In friendships, you're so sensitive, it was just a joke. Don't make it a big deal. Or even in spiritual environments, if you disagree with me, you're going against God's will. Different faces. Same trap. Manipulation thrives where self-trust is damaged, because if you don't trust your inner voice, you will trust someone else's, even when it leads you away from yourself. So understand this. The psychology of manipulation and vulnerability are connected. Manipulation targets the unhealed, and healing, emotional, spiritual, internal, weakens the manipulator's power. You cannot manipulate someone who is rooted in truth, self-worth, and inner clarity, because manipulation only grows in the dark, in confusion, fear, guilt, and self-doubt. As we move into the next section, we will break down the specific types of manipulation, both psychological and spiritual, and how they show up in everyday life and in the Bible. Because awareness is not enough, you must learn to see the patterns clearly, name them, and recognize them before they take root. Section 3. Types of manipulation. Now that we understand where manipulation began, how it works, and why certain people are more vulnerable to it, we need to bring clarity to the different forms manipulation takes, because manipulation is not one behavior. It is a spectrum. Some forms are obvious, others are subtle. Some are emotional, others are spiritual. Some destroy quickly, others destroy slowly over years. Manipulation can come through words, silence, actions, emotions, attention, withdrawal, or even through scripture when misused. And to protect ourselves, we must learn to recognize the forms it takes, both in others and within ourselves. There are 4 major categories of manipulation: emotional manipulation and psychological manipulation, narcissistic and control-based. Manipulation, spiritual manipulation. Let's walk through each one clearly and honestly. First type. 1. Emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulation uses feelings as tools of control. It plays with your heart to influence your actions. A person who uses emotional manipulation does not ask. They pressure, guilt, shame, or emotionally corner you into giving them what they want. Some common emotional manipulation tactics include guilt tripping, or playing the victim, silent treatment, emotional outbursts, you owe me messages, conditional affection, love bombing then withdrawal. Emotional manipulators don't say, "Please do this." They say, "If you don't do this, I will be hurt, upset, disappointed, or leave." The goal is not love, it is emotional control. Biblical example, Delilah with Samson. She used his love and emotional attachment to pressure him into revealing his secret. She cried, questioned his love, and played the emotional victim. If you loved me, you would tell me. Her tears were not genuine. They were strategy. Modern example. A partner says, if you really loved me, you wouldn't need space. A parent says, after everything I sacrificed for you, you should do what I say. A friend says, you're never there for me, when what they mean is, you didn't do what I wanted this time. Emotional manipulation works because it confuses love with obligation. It replaces I choose you with I fear losing you. Mental and psychological manipulation. This form of manipulation targets the mind. It aims to weaken your sense of reality, so you rely on the manipulator's version of truth. This includes gaslighting, twisting facts, denying what happened, rewriting history, blame-shifting, minimizing your feelings, confusion and mind games. Gaslighting is the most common form. When someone makes you question your perception, memory, or sanity. For example, I never said that. You're imagining things. You're overreacting. It wasn't that serious. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. Psychological manipulation is slow and subtle. It erodes the mind the way water erodes rock, drop by drop. Biblical example, the serpent with Eve. He did not deny God's words. He twisted them. He questioned her reality, her understanding, and God's intentions. He implanted doubt, making her rely on his interpretation instead of God's truth. Modern example. A partner cheats and says, "You're paranoid. You're making things up." A boss says, "You misunderstood. I never promised that raise," even though they did. A friend says, "You're crazy. Everyone knows you're dramatic." Mental manipulation steals your clarity. It disconnects you from your inner compass, so you stop trusting yourself. Narcissistic and control-based manipulation, this is the most dangerous form, because it creates dependency and domination. The manipulator seeks power, superiority, and control, often without empathy or remorse. These manipulators use cycles of love bombing, idealization, devaluation, control, intimidation, jealousy, and isolation, withholding affection, punishment, cruelty masked as honesty. Sudden affection to reel you back, they condition you like a psychological roller coaster. Creating emotional highs and lows that become addictive. Why addictive? Because the brain becomes hooked on the dopamine reward of finally earning love again. This is the same pattern seen in domestic abuse, toxic relationships and trauma bonds, pain, apology, affection, repeat. And over time, the victim becomes attached not to love, but to the hope of love. Biblical example, Jezebel and King Ahab. Jezebel controlled, manipulated, intimidated, and spiritually dominated. Ahab became emotionally passive and dependent on her influence. She destroyed reputations, silenced truth, and used power to control. This story reflects narcissistic and controlling manipulation at a national level. Modern example. A controlling partner monitoring your phone, isolating you from friends, making you doubt your worth, and then giving affection only when you obey. A boss who threatens your job subtly to keep you overworking. A friend who dominates decisions, convinces you they know better, and punishes you emotionally if you disagree. Control-based manipulation doesn't want a relationship. It wants possession. Spiritual manipulation. This is the most destructive form because it uses God, faith, morality, or spirituality as tools of control. Spiritual manipulation occurs when someone uses scripture, spiritual authority, guilt, fear, or the concept of God's will to dominate or silence another. It sounds like, God told me you need to listen to me. If you question me, you're questioning God. A good Christian would forgive and forget. You must obey, or God will be displeased. Spiritual manipulation doesn't guide, it coerces. It does not connect you to God. It replaces God with a human controller. It can happen in religious communities, marriages, friendships, and families. Biblical example: the Pharisees. They twisted the law to control people, elevate themselves, and shame those who didn't comply. Jesus confronted this repeatedly, exposing how they used religion to manipulate, burden, and control others rather than uplift them. Modern example: a pastor telling someone they cannot leave an abusive marriage because it's God's will to endure. A spouse weaponizing the Bible to silence their partner and avoid accountability. A parent telling a child that obedience equals holiness, even when the parent is abusive. Spiritual manipulation is dangerous because it confuses the voice of God with the voice of the manipulator. Where God brings conviction with love and freedom, spiritual manipulators bring shame, fear, and captivity. These four types of manipulation often overlap. A single manipulator may use emotional, mental, control-based, and spiritual tactics all at once, especially if they want deep influence over a person's identity and soul. The more forms they use, the harder it becomes for the victim to break free, because manipulation gradually rewires how a person thinks, loves, and sees themselves. And this is why awareness is so important. You cannot fight what you cannot see. Clarity breaks control. Naming the pattern breaks the illusion. Now that we've laid the foundation of what manipulation is, how it works, why people fall into it, and its main forms, we are ready to go deeper into how to recognize the signs early, before the damage begins. Section 4. Early warning signs and red flags of manipulation. Most people don't fall into manipulation because they are blind. They fall into it because the signs that show up at the beginning are easy to overlook, justify, or romanticize. Manipulation rarely starts as manipulation. It starts as charm, care, intensity, interest, protection, or love. Before manipulation becomes obvious, it arrives in small and subtle red flags, the ones that whisper before they roar. If we can learn to spot these early signs, we can protect ourselves before the damage begins. Let's walk through the most common early red flags one by one. 1. They move too fast, too soon. Manipulation almost always begins with speed. Too much closeness, too much intensity, too much too soon. This person doesn't give you time to think, evaluate, or see them clearly. They shower you with attention, affection, validation, and promises, creating a fast emotional bond before trust is earned. In relationships, it may sound like, I've never felt this way about anyone. We're meant to be. You're the only one who understands me. In friendships, you're my best friend already. I feel like I've known you forever. In spiritual or leadership settings, God brought you into my life for a reason, to follow my guidance. Early intensity is not love. It is strategy. It creates attachment before discernment. Healthy connections grow. Manipulative connections accelerate. They study you, not to know you, but to use you. A manipulator pays close attention, but not with empathy. With intention. They listen, watch, and observe to learn your insecurities, triggers, dreams, and wounds. They want to know. What makes you insecure? What makes you feel guilty? What you fear losing? What you crave emotionally? What you didn't receive growing up? Not to heal you, but to access and control you. This is why many victims say, "It felt like they understood me better than anyone." They did, but not for love, for leverage. 3. They create a sense of special bond. Early on, manipulators create the illusion that your connection is rare and irreplaceable. They make you feel chosen, seen, and unlike anyone else, which makes you more likely to tolerate their behavior later. This special bond builds emotional dependency. They may say, "No one will care about you like I do. No one gets you the way I do. We have something others don't." The goal, make you feel that losing them is losing something sacred. They disrespect boundaries. One of the earliest signs is how they respond when you say no, when you need space, or when you express discomfort. A manipulator will push your limits, ignore your boundaries, make you feel guilty for having needs. React negatively when you take space. Pay attention to this. Someone's reaction to your boundaries reveals their intentions. Healthy people respect limits. Manipulators test them, push them, or punish you for setting them. They start with small disrespect. Manipulation doesn't begin with insults or cruelty. It begins with tiny cracks in respect. A joke at your expense. A subtle criticism. A comment that feels off. Mocking your feelings. Rolling their eyes. A passive-aggressive remark. You feel a sting, but you brush it off. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. They're just joking. I'm being too sensitive. Those small moments are tests. If you ignore them, the disrespect grows. The first boundary you ignore becomes the foundation of your self-betrayal. They guilt you for your feelings. A manipulator quickly frames your emotions as the problem. If you're hurt, you're too sensitive. If you're upset, you're dramatic. If you set a boundary, you're selfish. If you pull back, you're ungrateful. The message is always, your feelings are wrong. Mine are the only valid ones. This begins the erosion of your self-trust and emotional voice. They subtly shift the balance of power. In the beginning, the power dynamic changes without you noticing. They may slowly make decisions for you. Advise you in a way that overrides your inner voice. Influence how you think, dress, behave, or choose. Push you to depend on their approval. Know what's best for you. Little by little, your autonomy shrinks. You start second-guessing yourself. You start checking with them first. Without realizing it, you start aligning your choices with what will keep them happy rather than what feels right for you. They create subtle isolation. Isolation rarely happens directly at first. It starts with small comments. Your friends don't really support you. Your family doesn't understand you like I do. I don't think that person is good for you. They may not forbid, they influence. Their tone, comments, and reactions slowly cause you to pull away from others. Soon, they become the main, or only, voice in your life. Control is easiest when you are isolated. They change when you don't comply. Notice this pattern. If you agree, they're loving, attentive, warm. If you disagree, they become cold, distant, angry, or withdrawn. Love or connection becomes conditional. This conditions the nervous system to choose peace over truth, compliance over authenticity. You begin to fear upsetting them. That fear is the beginning of control. Your body knows before your mind does. Before your mind admits something is wrong, your body whispers. You feel uneasy, drained, tense, guilty, or anxious around them. Your chest feels heavy, your stomach tight, your energy low. Your intuition feels the misalignment long before your mind rationalizes it. When the emotional body says pay attention, the mind often replies, don't overthink. They didn't mean it that way. Every time we silence that inner signal, we hand over a piece of our power. These early red flags are not random. They are the foundation of manipulation. If ignored, they evolve into the deeper patterns we covered earlier. The key truth is this: manipulation rarely appears as a threat at the beginning. It appears as connection, care, intensity, chemistry, spiritual alignment, or emotional safety. The devil did not appear to Eve with darkness. He came with curiosity, conversation, and a tone of understanding. Manipulators still do the same. Manipulation begins not with control, but with access. Once a manipulator has consistent access to your emotions, thoughts, needs, or insecurities, they begin to shape them. Recognizing these signs early protects your heart, your mind, and your future. Section 5. The progressive cycle of manipulation. Manipulation is not an event. It is a process. It unfolds in stages, slowly and strategically, the way a vine wraps around a tree. It doesn't choke the tree all at once. It climbs, attaches, and tightens over time. Most people who end up in deeply manipulative relationships, friendships, workplaces, or environments didn't fall into darkness overnight. They were guided there step by step, emotionally conditioned until control felt normal and self-betrayal felt like love. Let's walk through the 5 stages of manipulation so you can recognize the pattern before it reaches its final and most damaging stage. Stage 1. Attraction and idealization. Every cycle begins with what seems like a blessing. The manipulator enters your life with charm, warmth, attentiveness, or spiritual alignment. They mirror your values, interests, dreams, and emotional needs. You feel seen, understood, chosen, and valued. This stage feels like connection, destiny, deep alignment, or finally, someone gets me. For romantic relationships, this is often the soulmate or meant-to-be stage. For friendships or authority figures, it feels like admiration and instant trust. The manipulator places you on a pedestal, not to honor you, but to lift you high enough that the fall will hurt. Biblical parallel. Absalom with the people of Israel. 2 Samuel 15. He charmed the people, listened to their complaints, kissed their hands, and presented himself as the one who truly cared about them, winning their hearts before betraying them. Modern example. A partner who showers you with love bombing, compliments, affection, gifts, intense connection. A mentor or leader who takes special interest in you, praises your potential, and offers guidance. A friend who becomes instantly close and emotionally bonded. The goal of stage 1 is attachment, because once you attach, your guard drops. Stage 2. Trust and dependency building. Once attachment is formed, the manipulator deepens the emotional bond. They become your primary source of emotional support, validation, and comfort. You begin to rely on them, sharing your fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities. This stage feels safe, intimate, and emotionally nourishing. But underneath is a quiet shift. Your world starts revolving around them, their opinions, their approval, and their presence. They position themselves as someone you need, someone you cannot lose, someone who knows you better than anyone. Biblical parallel. Delilah with Samson. She gained his trust, created emotional intimacy, and accessed his inner world. He opened his heart, and she used his vulnerability against him. Modern example. A romantic partner becomes your emotional home. A friend becomes your main confidant and safe place. A spiritual leader becomes the voice you depend on for direction. The manipulator now becomes your emotional anchor, and that creates dependency. The goal of stage 2 is emotional reliance, because dependency becomes the foundation for control. Stage 3. Devaluation and control. This is where the shift begins. Slowly and subtly, the warmth decreases. The tone changes. Criticism begins. You start feeling not enough, too much, or not the same as before. The manipulator introduces doubt, guilt, and insecurity into the relationship. They withdraw affection, approval, or validation when you don't align with their expectations. The person who made you feel special now makes you feel replaceable or flawed. This creates a psychological imbalance. You try to get back to the good stage, the version of them who once gave you love, praise, or comfort. This is how the cycle traps you. Biblical parallel. Saul with David. Saul once loved David and valued him. But once David's favor grew, Saul's insecurity turned into jealousy, control, and attempts to diminish him. The shift from favor to attack is a classic manipulation pattern. Modern example. A partner begins criticizing your looks, your friends, your habits. A friend points out your flaws disguised as honesty or help. A boss who once praised you now belittles or doubts your abilities. This stage conditions you to work for their approval. Love becomes a reward for compliance. Disapproval becomes punishment for independence. The goal of stage 3 is control through insecurity. Stage 4. Confusion, self-doubt, and identity error. At this point, the manipulator has disrupted your self-trust. You start questioning your own perception, memory, worth, and decisions. Common inner thoughts in this stage are, maybe it is my fault. Maybe I am too sensitive. They were so loving before. Maybe I changed. Maybe I'm the problem. This mental confusion is intentional. It keeps you unstable, emotionally dependent, and constantly trying to fix things, usually yourself. Gaslighting, blame-shifting, and mind games intensify. Your identity becomes blurry. You lose confidence in your intuition. You start believing their version of you more than your own. Biblical parallel. The Israelites in Egypt. After years of psychological oppression, They began to see themselves as slaves, not children of God. Even when freedom was offered, many doubted they could handle it. This shows how manipulation can reshape identity over time. Modern example. A partner says, "No one else will love you," and you start believing it. A parent says, "You can't make it without us," and you fear independence. A leader says, "Without me, you'll fall apart," and you stay even when mistreated. The goal of stage 4 is identity erosion. So the victim no longer believes in their own voice, truth, or value. Stage 5, full control and self-loss. This is the final stage where the manipulator no longer needs to push, convince or demand, because now the victim polices themselves. The person loses touch with who they were before. They shrink, silence their needs, abandon their beliefs, and suppress their emotions to maintain the relationship. They are mentally, emotionally, or spiritually controlled, even without visible force. Signs of stage 5 include: you no longer recognize yourself. You feel trapped but don't know how to leave. You constantly walk on eggshells. You stay to avoid guilt, fear, or shame. You feel emotionally dependent. You live in survival mode, biblical parallel. When Samson finally revealed his secret to Delilah, his strength was gone. His identity, purpose, and divine gift were compromised because the manipulation had reached completion. Delilah didn't cut his hair. Samson gave her the access to the place of his strength. The final stage of manipulation is not control over your actions. It is control over your identity. Modern example. Someone leaves a manipulative relationship and says, "I don't know who I am anymore." Someone leaves a toxic church and says, "I lost my connection with God because I thought He was like them." Someone leaves a controlling friend or parent and says, "I forgot how to think for myself." The goal of stage 5 is self-loss. Because once a person is disconnected from their identity, they are the easiest to control. This is the cycle of manipulation. Attraction, dependency, control, identity erosion, self-loss. Knowing this cycle gives you the power to break it, because once you can name the stage you're in, you can see the way out. In the next section, we will shift from awareness to empowerment. Section 6. Breaking the cycle. How people wake up and begin healing escaping. Manipulation is not a single moment. It is a gradual awakening. Just as manipulation takes place in layers, so does freedom. People don't suddenly snap out of it. They slowly start seeing what they were unable or afraid to see before. The process of breaking free from manipulation begins long before a person walks away. It begins inside, with a shift in awareness, a spark of clarity, a moment where the fog begins to clear and a person reconnects with their inner truth. Let's walk through how this awakening unfolds. Cracks of awareness freedom often begins with small moments, tiny cracks in the illusion. Something feels off, a comment hits differently, a pattern repeats enough times that it can no longer be ignored. The same excuses no longer convince the heart. The same justifications no longer silence the intuition. This is the stage where a person begins to observe rather than react. They start noticing the inconsistency between words and actions, between love and treatment, between promises and reality. A quiet inner voice whispers, "This is not right." That whisper is the beginning of liberation. Biblical parallel. The prodigal son came to himself. A moment of internal awakening before he ever left the pig pen. He woke up inside before he changed his life outside. Reclaiming the mind. Cognitive clarity. Returns manipulation clouds thinking. But when awareness begins, the mind starts reclaiming clarity. This stage is marked by questions. Why am I always the one apologizing? Why do I feel anxious around them? Why do I feel smaller than I used to? Why does love feel like pressure, fear, or guilt? As clarity grows, confusion weakens, and the manipulator's spell begins to break. This is often when people start researching, seeking counsel, journaling, listening to teachings, or comparing healthy versus unhealthy behavior. The brain starts to reconnect with truth. The person begins to trust their thoughts again. Emotional awakening, feeling the truth. Once the mind starts to see, the heart begins to feel. This is a painful stage, because now the person feels the weight of what they endured, the emotional cost, the self-betrayal, the internal wounds. Tears often appear here, not because the manipulator is gone, but because the person realizes how long they abandoned themselves to survive the relationship. This is where many people say, I lost myself. I dimmed my voice. I stopped being me. As painful as this is, it is a holy turning point, because feeling the truth is the first step to reclaiming the heart. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel. The return of self-trust and inner authority. At this stage, the person begins rebuilding the connection with their inner voice. The voice that was silenced, doubted, or overridden. They begin saying things like, I know what I feel. My experience is valid. My intuition was right. This is where the soul begins returning home. Self-trust is the opposite of manipulation, because once a person trusts themselves, they can no longer be controlled. As self-trust grows, the manipulator's influence weakens. The emotional dependency breaks. The fog lifts. Strength returns. This is the stage where boundaries begin forming, not out of defense, but out of clarity. Separation. The emotional or physical exit freedom often begins emotionally before it becomes physical. The person may detach internally long before they walk away. They stop sharing their heart, stop seeking approval, stop explaining themselves, stop trying to fix it. There are two types of exits. Internal exit. The heart leaves first. External exit. The physical or relational separation follows. Sometimes the person stays physically for a little while, but the manipulation no longer works, because their mind and emotions no longer submit. Some exits are quiet, some are dramatic, some are planned, some are sudden. One final betrayal snaps the remaining thread. Biblical parallel. When Moses led Israel out of Egypt, they left physically. But Egypt was still inside them. Leaving the environment is one step. Leaving the mindset is another. The physical departure is not the end. It is the beginning of recovery. Withdrawal. Grief and identity rebuilding after leaving. A person often goes through a withdrawal phase, similar to breaking an addiction. Why? Because they were trauma bonded, addicted to the cycle of pain and relief, of losing love and earning it back. This stage includes grief for the version of themselves they lost, grief for the relationship they wanted it to be, confusion about who they are now, feelings of emptiness or loneliness. This is not regression. It is healing. In this stage, people often say, "I don't know who I am without them." This is normal, because manipulation rewires identity. This is where God begins restoring identity if the person is willing to rebuild from truth, not from the wounds healing requires. Time, truth, support, self-compassion. Reconnection with God and self-it is not instant, but each layer of grief releases a layer of the manipulator's hold, restoration and identity rebirth. As the person heals, something sacred happens. They begin to meet themselves again. The real self, the one that existed before the manipulation. They rediscover their voice, their personality, their values, their confidence, their intuition, their purpose. They start making decisions again, not out of fear, guilt, or pressure, but out of alignment and authenticity. They learn to love without losing themselves. They learn to give without abandoning their needs. They learn to forgive without returning to bondage. This is where God rebuilds them, stronger, wiser, clearer, freer. Biblical parallel. After Samson's fall, his hair grew back, his strength returned. Yes, he suffered loss, but God restored his purpose. Healing may come with scars, but scars are proof of survival and testimony. The goal of healing is not to return to who you were before the manipulation. It is to become someone stronger, wiser, and more rooted than ever. This is the beauty of breaking the cycle. You don't just reclaim your life, you reclaim yourself. Section 7. The healing process. Restoring the mind, heart, identity and spirit, breaking free from manipulation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of healing, rebuilding and returning to the truth of who you are. Because the real damage of manipulation is not what someone did to you. It is what it made you believe about yourself. Healing is the journey of reclaiming your mind, your voice, your heart, your identity, your connection with God, your sense of self-worth. Healing is not about going back to who you were before manipulation. It's about becoming someone stronger, wiser, and more rooted than ever before. Here is the healing journey that most survivors of manipulation walk through, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and somatically. Healing the mind, reclaiming your thinking. Manipulation attacks clarity, logic, and self-perception. So the first step of healing is mental renewal, learning to separate truth from lies, reality from illusion. This includes identifying false beliefs you adopted during manipulation, challenging the narratives that were planted in your mind, relearning how to think independently, rebuilding cognitive clarity and discernment. You begin by asking, what beliefs did I internalize that were never mine? What thoughts did they install in me about myself? For many, this includes beliefs like, I'm too sensitive, I'm hard to love, I'm not enough, I can't trust myself, I need someone to guide me. Healing begins by replacing those lies with truth. Biblical parallel. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. True transformation begins with truth replacing distortion. Your thinking must be detoxed from manipulation before your identity can be restored. Healing the heart, feeling and releasing the pain. The heart cannot heal through denial or suppression. It heals through acknowledgement. For many, The deepest wound is not what was done to them, but how they abandoned themselves to survive. Healing the heart involves allowing yourself to feel the pain you numbed, grieving the version of you that stayed silent, tolerated mistreatment, or hoped for change, honoring the part of you that endured, adapted, and survived. Healing requires tears, tears that cleanse the soul of what it carried alone for too long. This is not weakness. It is emotional detox. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel, and what you finally feel, you can finally release. Healing the nervous system. Safety and regulation, manipulation conditions the nervous system to live in survival mode, fawning, freezing, or fearing emotional consequences. That's why even after leaving, you may still react as if the manipulator is present. The nervous system needs retraining to feel safe again. This includes learning to self-soothe, re-establishing inner safety, calming anxiety responses, interrupting trauma patterns in the body. This is where breathwork, grounding therapy, prayer, journaling, and trauma-informed practices are powerful. You must teach your body that peace is safe, not dangerous. Because for many survivors, calm feels unfamiliar and chaos feels normal, simply because the nervous system was conditioned that way. This is not your fault. It is your wiring adapting to survive. Healing rewires the body to rest. Healing the inner child, the root of manipulation openings. Most people who fall into manipulation didn't first encounter it in adulthood. They learned the pattern as a child, if you grew up. Pleasing, to earn love. Walking on eggshells. Being the good child. Staying quiet to avoid conflict. Seeking validation to feel worthy. Then the manipulator did not create the wound. They exploited it. Healing requires going back to that younger version of you who learned, my needs don't matter. My voice brings trouble. Love must be earned. I must be strong to be safe. This part of you needs nurturing, validation, and unconditional acceptance from you and from God. Restoring the inner child breaks the emotional doorway that manipulators once used to enter. Restoring identity. Remembering who you are. Manipulation distorts identity, so healing restores it. This stage is powerful. It's where you answer the question, who am I without the pain, the fear, and the influence of others? This stage includes rebuilding self-worth, remembering your strengths, values, uniqueness, and calling, restoring self-respect and self-acceptance, reconnecting with your God-given identity. Identity restoration is not about gaining something new. It's about returning to the truth that was always yours, but was buried under manipulation, fear, and conditioning. As identity returns, confidence returns. As confidence returns, voice returns. As voice returns, boundaries form, and with boundaries, manipulation loses access. Rebuilding boundaries and relational standards. Healing isn't complete until you learn to protect your peace going forward. This stage is about learning to say no without guilt, choosing who gets access to you, setting emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual boundaries, recognizing red flags early, raising your standards for relationships. Love, leadership, and community boundaries are not walls. They are filters. They don't block love. They block harm. They don't prevent connection. They protect connection. God doesn't ask us to tolerate abuse. He teaches wisdom, discernment, and stewardship of the heart. Reconnecting with God's truth and spiritual alignment. For many survivors, manipulation distorts not only self-perception, but their perception of God. Some lose trust in their own discernment. Some feel distant from God because the manipulator used spirituality as a weapon. Some confuse religious control with God's voice. True healing includes spiritual realignment. Separating God from the manipulator's behavior. Rebuilding trust in God's guidance. Hearing God's voice without interference. Returning to grace, freedom, and truth. God's truth liberates. Manipulation binds. God convicts with love. Manipulators shame with fear. God leads with gentleness. Manipulators control with intimidation. Healing brings you back to the God who restores, not the one you were taught to fear. Healing is not linear. It is layered, like peeling back armor built for survival, revealing the heart underneath that deserves peace, truth, and love. Some days you'll feel strong. Some days you'll feel triggered. Both are normal. Both are progress. Healing is not about forgetting what happened. It's about no longer being controlled by it. It is the journey of returning home, to yourself, to truth, to God, and to the life that manipulation once dimmed. Section 8. Protecting yourself from manipulation moving forward. Healing from manipulation is powerful, but protection is just as important. Because once you've reclaimed your mind, heart, and identity, the goal is not to live in fear, but to live with wisdom, discernment, and emotional strength. Protection is not about building walls. It's about developing clarity, self-respect, and spiritual awareness. So manipulation no longer finds a doorway into your life. Here are the key pillars of protecting yourself going forward. Strengthen self-trust. Your inner compass must lead. Again, the first layer of protection is self-trust. Manipulation begins where self-trust breaks. So protection begins where self-trust is restored. This means learning to listen to your intuition, honor your feelings, believe your experiences, trust what your body and spirit are telling you. If something feels wrong, if your peace shifts, if your spirit feels uneasy, pay attention. Your body senses misalignment before your mind explains it. When self-trust is strong, manipulators cannot distort your perception. Know your values and non-negotiables. A person without clear values is easily influenced. A person with solid values cannot be moved by emotional or spiritual pressure. Define what you will and will not accept in love, friendship, family, community, leadership, spiritual guidance. When values are defined, manipulation is easier to detect, because anything that violates them becomes a clear red flag. Your values are your armor. Build and maintain boundaries. Boundaries are the spiritual, emotional, and psychological protection of your soul. They communicate, this is what is okay with me, and what is not. Boundaries protect your energy with your heart, your time, your mental peace. Your access a boundary doesn't require conflict. It requires clarity. It is not a reaction. It is a standard. When boundaries are firm, manipulation loses oxygen. Watch actions, not words. Manipulators rely on words, charm, promises, apologies, spiritual language, flattery, or emotional narratives. Protection comes from observing patterns, not listening to speeches. Watch for consistency between words and actions. Intent and behavior. Apologies and change. Someone can speak like an angel and act like a serpent. Jesus warned of wolves in sheep's clothing. Kind words, gentle tone, spiritual language, yet harmful intent. Let actions be the measure, not presentation. Slow down bonding. Time reveals truth. The fastest way to avoid manipulation is not to emotionally attach quickly. Time is your greatest filter. Manipulation relies on speed. Discernment relies on patience. Before trusting someone deeply, observe them across time, different environments, stressful moments, conflicts. When you set boundaries, you don't truly know a person until they hear no from you. Time exposes truth. Be willing to wait for clarity. Yourself with healthy people. Healthy community protects you. Isolation is where manipulation grows. Connection is where discernment strengthens. When you have people in your life who support your boundaries, celebrate your growth, respect your identity, speak truth with love, encourage your healing, you become spiritually and emotionally guarded. Healthy people help you recognize unhealthy ones faster. Strengthen your relationship with God's voice. One of the greatest protections against manipulation is spiritual discernment, the ability to sense truth beyond surface appearance. To protect your spirit, spend time in prayer. Strengthen spiritual discernment. Separate God's voice from human influence. Know Scripture so no one can twist it against you. When you know God's character, you can instantly recognize when someone uses His name in a way that doesn't align with love, freedom, humility, and truth. God leads with peace, not pressure. With clarity, not confusion. With love, not fear. Honor, red flags. Immediately protection becomes real when you stop negotiating with red flags. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes to leave. One red flag may be a warning. 2 is a pattern. 3 is a message. Do not save potential. Honor reality. Someone's behavior is not a maybe. It is who they are showing you they are. Respond early. Distance early. Protect early. Wait. Detach from the need to be liked. This is one of the strongest shields against manipulation. Manipulators prey on people who fear disappointing others, being judged or losing approval. When you no longer need everyone to like you, you become immune to emotional control. You stop bending to please. You stop over-explaining. You stop tolerating disrespect. Freedom begins when your desire to protect your peace becomes stronger than your desire to be accepted. 10. Walk away when peace leaves, your spirit knows. When peace leaves, God is warning you. If you feel drained, confused, guilty, trapped, anxious, silenced, less like yourself, that is not love. That is not alignment. That is not God. When peace leaves, do not stay. Leaving is not failure. It is protection. Protection is never about fear. It is about wisdom. It is recognizing that your heart, mind, and spirit are sacred, and not everyone should be given access to them. When you know who you are, what aligns with you, and what God's voice sounds like. Manipulation can knock, but it cannot enter. Section 9. Teaching children and the next generation about manipulation. 1. Of the greatest acts of healing is not just breaking a cycle for ourselves, but making sure the next generation never has to recover from what we had to survive. Children don't become vulnerable to manipulation by accident. They become vulnerable when they grow up emotionally unprotected, unheard, or conditioned to abandon themselves. To break generational cycles, we must teach children from a young age how to trust their inner voice, communicate their feelings, stand firm in boundaries, identify manipulation and pressure, recognize healthy versus unhealthy behavior, develop a strong identity rooted in truth. Here are the foundations needed to raise emotionally and spiritually strong children who cannot be easily manipulated. Teach children to trust their feelings. Most adults who fall into manipulation were taught as children. Don't feel that way. You're overreacting. Stop being sensitive. Your feelings don't matter. This teaches a child to silence their emotional compass, the very compass that protects them. To break the cycle, we must teach children. Your feelings are valid. You're allowed to express how you feel. Your inner voice matters. You can say when something doesn't feel right. A child who learns to trust their feelings grows into an adult who is not easily gaslit. Teach children the power of no. Without punishment, a child who is punished, shamed, or guilted for saying no becomes an adult who fears boundaries. And that is the perfect target for manipulation. Instead, teach no is not disrespect. It is self-respect. Boundaries are healthy. You are allowed to refuse what feels wrong. Celebrate when children communicate their boundaries respectfully. Don't crush them. A child who knows they are allowed to say no becomes an adult who does not stay where they are not respected. Model healthy love. Apologies and repair children learn relationships by watching the adults around them. If they witness manipulation, control, silent treatment, forced apology, love withdrawn as punishment, they will repeat these dynamics in adulthood, either as the victim or the manipulator. Teach them by example. Kindness without control. Apologizing when wrong. Repairing after conflict. Loving without conditions. Respect during disagreements. Children raised around healthy love develop emotional immunity to manipulative love. Build their identity with truth, not performance. Children become vulnerable to manipulation when their identity depends on performance, achievement, obedience, or pleasing others. Break this by teaching them. You are loved for who you are, not for what you do. Your worth doesn't come from achievements. You don't need to earn love. Love is given. When identity is rooted in truth, a child cannot be easily broken by emotional pressure later in life. Teach critical thinking and emotional awareness. Teach children to question, analyze and reflect, not blindly accept. Encourage them to ask, does this feel right? Is this fair? Is this loving? Teach them what manipulation looks like in simple language. If someone makes you feel guilty to get what they want, That is not love. If someone pressures you not to tell your parents, that is wrong. If you feel scared to say how you feel, something is not healthy. Spiritual wisdom plus emotional intelligence. Protection. Teach them the difference between God's voice and control. Children must learn early that God's voice is loving, freeing and gentle, not controlling or fear-based. Teach them. God guides. He does not manipulate. God corrects with love, not shame. God wants relationship, not control. This protects them from spiritual manipulation later in life. In relationships, friendships or religious environments, teach accountability. Without shame, manipulative adults often began as children who were either never held accountable or shamed excessively for mistakes. Both extremes create emotional distortion. Teach children responsibility. Consequences with love, repair after harm. How to apologize sincerely. This prevents them from becoming manipulators. Affirm their voice, choices, and identity. Speak truth into them. You are allowed to think for yourself. Your voice matters. You can come to me about anything. You don't have to please everyone. Being kind doesn't mean tolerating disrespect. Affirmation builds inner strength and self-respect. When children know who they are, they cannot be tricked into becoming who someone else wants them to be. Breaking generational cycles starts with us, but legacy is built through what we teach them. We heal backwards when we break patterns. We heal forwards when we teach the next generation not to repeat them. Section 10. When Christians confuse manipulation with love, forgiveness, submission, or God's will. One of the most painful forms of manipulation happens when faith is used as a weapon instead of a source of love and freedom. Many believers remain in harmful relationships, families, or spiritual environments because they were taught a distorted version of Scripture, one that benefits the manipulator, not God. To protect ourselves, we must separate God's voice from man-made control, because what many call Christian duty is sometimes emotional and spiritual manipulation dressed as righteousness. Let's bring clarity to some of the most misused biblical concepts. Love does not mean tolerating harm. Many Christians are told that love means staying quiet, being patient with abuse, or enduring mistreatment, but that is not the love God teaches. As it says in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 4-7, love is patient and kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It does not mean allowing someone to mistreat, belittle, or dominate you. Biblical love has boundaries. Jesus loved deeply, yet he walked away from places where hearts were closed. Love does not mean surrendering your dignity or identity to keep peace. If love costs you your voice, your safety, or your God-given identity, it is not biblical love. It is emotional control disguised as love. Forgiveness does not mean reconciliation or access. Many Christians stay in harmful situations because they were taught that forgiveness means restoring the relationship. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same. Jesus teaches forgiveness, but he never commanded us to put ourselves back into harm. Forgiveness is about freeing the heart from bitterness, not returning access to someone who has not changed. Jesus forgave his persecutors on the cross, but he did not go back to dine with those who sought to destroy him. Forgiveness is given, Access is earned. Forgiveness is unconditional. Reconciliation requires repentance, change, and safety. Submission has been misused to silence and control. The Bible teaches submission, but never as a tool of dominance or abuse. Submission in Scripture is mutual, loving, and Christ-like, not one-sided oppression. When Paul spoke about marriage in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 25, he told husbands to love their wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. Christ's leadership is sacrificial, gentle, protective, and rooted in love, not control. Submission never meant silencing a woman, enduring emotional or physical abuse, losing your identity to keep the peace, obeying sin or manipulation. God never asked anyone to submit to harm. True biblical submission reflects shared honor, respect, and humility, not control. Honor your parents does not mean accepting abuse. Many adults stay in toxic family dynamics because they are told to honor your father and mother. But honoring is not the same as tolerating abuse. Honoring means respect, prayer, and kindness of heart, not allowing mistreatment, betrayal, or emotional control. Jesus set boundaries with his earthly family when needed. In Matthew chapter 12, verse 48 to 50, when his family tried to pull him away from his mission, he said that those who do the will of the Father are his family. Jesus showed that God's calling and truth come before family pressure. You can honor your parents without giving them the power to harm you. Distance can still be honoring if closeness is destructive. Turn the other cheek is not a call to be a doormat. Some teach believers that turning the other cheek means accepting mistreatment endlessly. But Jesus was teaching strength of spirit, not passivity. When Jesus spoke those words in Matthew chapter 5, verse 39, he was addressing retaliation and revenge, not enabling abuse. He was saying, do not mirror evil with evil. Keep your integrity, not stay where you are being harmed. Jesus confronted wrongdoing, confronted Pharisees, confronted injustice. He did not silently tolerate abuse. Turning the other cheek means refusing to let someone's sin make you sinful in return, not submitting to mistreatment. Do not judge is often taken out of context. Many use do not judge to silence discernment. But Jesus was not telling us to ignore sin, harm, or deception. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 to 5, Jesus teaches not to judge with hypocrisy, to examine ourselves first. But he also calls us to discern, correct, and protect. We are called to judge righteously, not condemn, but evaluate what is healthy and what is harmful. Discernment is not judgment, it is wisdom. Confusing suffering for Christ with suffering from people. Many believers think staying in pain means they are carrying their cross. But suffering for Christ is not the same as suffering from someone's sin. Suffering for Christ means standing for truth, living righteously. Enduring persecution for the gospel suffering from manipulation, abuse, or control is not holy. It is harmful. Jesus never asked anyone to sacrifice their emotional, mental, or spiritual health to please a person. God does not call his children to bondage. He calls them to freedom. Touch not my anointed is used to silence accountability. This verse is often misused by leaders to avoid correction. But Scripture teaches that leaders must be held to higher accountability, not less. Jesus confronted spiritual leaders who misled people. He exposed hypocrisy, deception, and pride consistently. No one is above accountability. Not pastors, not parents, not spouses, not leaders. Godly authority leads with humility and openness, not intimidation. If someone uses God's name to silence your questions, that is spiritual manipulation, not spiritual leadership. God is not the author of fear-based obedience, forced loyalty, or emotional captivity. The Bible is a book of freedom. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Jesus said he came to set the captives free. His truth brings clarity, not confusion. If a teaching binds your spirit, silences your voice, or separates you from your God-given identity, it is not from God. True faith does not imprison. It liberates. True love does not control, it honors. True community does not shame, it restores. Section 11. Why some people become manipulators. The psychology and spiritual roots of manipulative personalities. Up to this point, we explored how manipulation affects the victim. But to break the cycle fully, we must also understand how manipulators are formed, because manipulation is not random. It is rooted in wounds, beliefs, fear, ego, and in some cases, spiritual influence. Understanding the origin of manipulation does not excuse harmful behavior, but it brings clarity to the brokenness behind it, which helps us detach emotionally and set boundaries effectively. There are 4 primary routes that lead a person to develop manipulative behaviors. Emotional survival strategies, learned in childhood insecurity, ego, and identity fragility trauma. Bonds with power and control. Spiritual corruption and darkness of the heart. Let's break them down clearly. Childhood survival patterns. Turned into adult control. Just as victims of manipulation often learned self-abandonment in childhood, many manipulators learned control as a survival strategy. If a child grows up in a home where love was conditional, attention was scarce, one parent was unpredictable or emotionally unavailable, they only felt safe when controlling people or outcomes. They may learn manipulation as a way to feel secure. Children learn, if I control the situation, I won't get hurt. If I win people over, I won't be abandoned. If I perform, please or pressure, I'll stay safe. These children grow into adults who don't know how to ask for their needs directly. They manipulate to get them met. This doesn't justify manipulation, but it reveals its origin, fear of vulnerability and fear of being powerless, insecurity, ego, and fragile identity. Not all manipulators appear broken. Some appear confident, powerful, even charismatic, but beneath the surface lies a fragile sense of self. These individuals manipulate to protect their self-image. They cannot handle being wrong. They fear rejection or humiliation. They need admiration to feel valuable. They control to avoid feeling small. Their ego becomes their armor, and manipulation becomes their shield. This is seen in King Saul. His insecurity made him jealous of David's success, so he manipulated with fear, control and attacks, not because David sinned, but because Saul's ego felt threatened. The insecure heart cannot celebrate others. It controls them. Addiction to power and control. For some, manipulation becomes a cycle of power they grow addicted to. Power can become a drug, especially for those who once felt powerless. When someone discovers they can control emotions, decisions or outcomes, it can create a psychological high that feeds the ego. This creates patterns like narcissistic behavior, emotional domination, winning in relationships, needing to be right or superior. These individuals do not want connection. They want control. They see people as extensions of themselves, not as separate souls with autonomy. Jezebel is a biblical example of this. She manipulated, intimidated, and dominated to maintain power. Her actions weren't rooted in insecurity alone, but in a desire to rule, fear, spiritual influence, and hardening of the heart. There is a deeper layer, one that psychology alone cannot explain. When manipulation becomes malicious, calculated, and heartless, it often has a spiritual component. In the Bible, hardened hearts, pride, and deception are often signs of spiritual darkness gaining access, not demon possession, but corruption of character. This may happen through repeated sin without repentance, pride that rejects correction, love of power over love of people. Spiritual blindness and self-deception for manipulators do not change because they love control more than truth. Pharaoh in Exodus is a clear example. Moses showed signs and wonders, yet Pharaoh's heart hardened repeatedly. He refused truth because releasing control felt like losing identity. When manipulation becomes a lifestyle, the heart closes to conviction. Important truth. Hurt people. Hurt people, but healed people. Don't harm. Some manipulators were once victims themselves. But instead of healing, they chose control as protection. Some were raised with entitlement, not empathy, and grew to believe others exist to serve their needs. Some were spiritually misguided and blended faith with dominance. Every manipulator has a story, but not every manipulator chooses. Healing. You cannot save someone who does not see their behavior as a problem. Boundaries protect you. Healing is their responsibility, not yours. Can manipulators change? Yes, but only if they acknowledge the harm they caused, take responsibility, seek healing with humility, learn new emotional skills, allow God to transform their heart without humility. There can be no transformation. Some will change, some won't. Your safety and peace cannot depend on their healing. Why this matters for your healing. Understanding the roots of manipulation helps remove self-blame, confusion, the illusion that you weren't enough, the fantasy that you could have fixed them. Knowing the psychology and spiritual roots brings emotional closure. When you understand why a manipulator behaves the way they do, you detach. Not in bitterness, in clarity. You stop asking, how could they do this to me? And instead you know, this behavior came from their wound, not my worth. Understanding doesn't justify the behavior, but it frees your heart from carrying the burden of their sins. Section 12. Final empowering conclusion. If you have listened this far, it means something inside of you is awakening. A voice that refuses to stay silent, confused, or controlled any longer. Awareness is rising, truth is returning, and with truth comes freedom. Manipulation may have stolen pieces of your past, but it does not get to define your future. You now understand how manipulation began, the psychology behind it, why people become vulnerable, how to recognize the early signs, how the cycle develops, how to break free and heal, how to protect yourself going forward, as how to raise the next generation differently, and why some people become manipulators. This journey has come full circle. From Eden, where manipulation first entered the human story, to today, where many still fight invisible battles in their minds, hearts, homes, and spiritual lives. But the story doesn't end in deception. God restores what manipulation tried to destroy. When Jesus began his ministry, he read from the scroll of Isaiah, declaring his purpose. He said in Luke chapter 4, verse 18, that he came to heal the broken-hearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and to set the oppressed free. That includes emotional oppression. That includes spiritual manipulation. That includes toxic soul ties, trauma bonds, and mental captivity. Jesus confronted manipulation, deception, and control everywhere he went. Whether from the enemy in the wilderness, the Pharisees in religion, or people trying to derail his purpose, he never submitted to manipulation. He exposed it with truth, and he is still doing that today. If manipulation has touched your life, hear this: you are not broken. You were conditioned. You are not weak. You were targeted because you are strong, empathetic, and full of heart. You are not foolish. You were taught to see good in people, even when they misused it. Your healing is not proof of failure. It is proof of courage. Because it takes strength to stay, but even greater strength to wake up, break free, and rebuild. Your story is not ending in confusion. It is entering clarity. Your heart is not finished. It is being restored. Your identity is not lost. It is returning to who God designed you to be. You are learning, evolving, and rising. And one day, you will look back and realize manipulation did not destroy you. It trained you to discern, to value truth, to protect your heart, and to never abandon yourself again. You will love again, but with wisdom. You will trust again, but with discernment. You will give again, but with boundaries. You will shine again, but with strength. The version of you emerging now is more grounded, more aligned, more spiritually awake, and more emotionally whole than the version that entered this storm. This is not just survival. This is rebirth. May God guide you into relationships that reflect His love, not control. May your spirit stay sensitive to His voice, not the voice of manipulation. May your heart stay open but protected, and may your life be filled with truth, freedom, peace, and alignment. You deserve relationships that feel like home, not like captivity. You deserve love that mirrors God's heart, not someone's wounds. Your story is shifting. This chapter is closing. A new one is beginning, with clarity, strength, and truth. If this message spoke to you, don't stop here. We've created more videos that go deeper. One about boundaries and self-respect in faith. and another that expands this very topic of religious manipulation and misused scripture in full detail. Watch them next to keep growing in clarity and truth, because every step you take toward awareness is a step toward freedom. Remember, God's voice brings peace, not pressure, and His truth will always lead you to healing, not control.